Nightwood by Djuna Barnes. Chapter 1. Bow Down. Early in 1880, in spite of a well-founded suspicion as to the advisability of perpetuating that race which has the sanction of the Lord and the disapproval of the people, Hedwig Volkween, a Viennese woman of great strength and military beauty, lying upon a canopied bed of a rich spectacular crimson, the balance stamped with the bifurcated wings of the House of Habsburg, the feather coverlet an envelope of satin on which, in massive and tarnished gold threads, stood the Volkween arms, gave birth, at the age of 45, to an only child, a son, 7 days after her physician predicted that she would be taken. Turning upon this field, which shook to the clatter of mourning horses in the street beyond, with the gross splendor of a general saluting the flag, she named him Felix, thrust him from her, and died. The child's father had gone 6 months previously, a victim of fever. Guido Volkween, a Jew of Italian descent, had been both a gourmet and a dandy, never appearing in public without the ribbon of some quite unknown distinction tinging his buttonhole with a faint thread. He had been small, rotund, and haughtily timid, his stomach protruding slightly in an upward jutting slope that brought into prominence the buttons of his waistcoat and trousers, marking the exact center of his body with the obstetric line seen on fruits. The inevitable arc produced by heavy rounds of Burgundy, Schlachny, and beer. The autumn binding him about as no other season with racial memories, a season of longing and of horror, he had called his weather. Then, walking in the Prater, he had been seen carrying in a conspicuously clenched fist the exquisite handkerchief of yellow and black linen that cried aloud of the ordinance of 1468, issued by one Pietro Barbo, demanding that, with a rope around its neck, Guido's race should run in the Corso for the amusement of the Christian populace, while ladies of noble birth, sitting upon spines too refined for rest, arose from their seats, and with the red-gowned cardinals and the monsignori, applauded with that cold, yet hysterical abandon of a people that is at once unjust and happy. The very Pope himself, shaken down from his hold on heaven with the laughter of a man who forgoes his angels that he might recapture the beast. This memory, and the handkerchief that accompanied it, had wrought in Guido, as certain flowers brought to a pitch of florid ecstasy no sooner attain their specific type than they fall into its decay, the sum total of what is the Jew. He had walked, hot, incautious, and damned, his eyelids quivering over the thick eyeballs, black with the pain of a participation that, 4 centuries later, made him a victim, as he felt the echo in his own throat of that cry running the Piazza Montanara long ago, Rova Vecchia, the degradation by which his people had survived. Childless at 59, Guido had prepared out of his own heart for his coming child a heart, fashioned on his own preoccupation, the remorseless homage to nobility, the genuflections the hunted body makes from muscular contraction, going down before the impending and inaccessible, as before a great heat. He had made Guido, as he was to make his son, heavy with impermissible blood. And childless he had died, save for that promise that hung at the Christian belt of Hedwig. Guido had lived as all Jews do, who, cut off from their people by accident or choice, find that they must inhabit a world whose constituents, being alien, force the mind to succumb to an imaginary populace. When a Jew dies on a Christian bosom, he dies impaled. Hedwig, in spite of her agony, wept upon an outcast. Her body at that moment became the barrier, and Guido died against that wall, troubled and alone, In life he had done everything to span the impossible gap. The saddest and most futile gesture of all had been his pretense to a barony. He had adopted the sign of the cross. He had said that he was an Austrian of an old, almost extinct line, producing to uphold his story the most amazing and inaccurate proofs. A coat of arms that he had no right to, and a list of progenitors, including their Christian names, who had never existed. When Hedwig came upon his black and yellow handkerchiefs, he had said that they were to remind him that one branch of his family had bloomed in Rome. He had tried to be one with her by adoring her, by imitating her goose step of a stride, a step that by him adopted became dislocated and comic. She would have done as much, but sensing something in him, blasphemed and lonely, she had taken the blow as a Gentile must, by moving towards him in recoil. She had believed whatever he had told her, but often enough she had asked, "What is the matter?" That continual reproach which was meant as a continual reminder of her love. It ran through his life like an accusing voice. He had been tormented into speaking highly of royalty, flinging out encomiums with the force of small water made great by the pressure of a thumb. He had laughed too heartily when in the presence of the lower order of title, as if by his good nature he could advance them to some distinction of which they dreamed. Confronted with nothing worse than a general in creaking leather, and with the slight repercussion of movement common to military men, who seemed to breathe from the inside out, smelling of gunpowder and horseflesh, lethargic yet prepared for participation in a war not yet scheduled, a type of which Hedwig had been very fond. Guido had shaken with an unseen trembling. He saw that Hedwig had the same bearing, the same though more condensed power of the hand, pattern on seizure in a smaller mold, as sinister in its reduction as a doll's house. The feather in her hat had been knife-clean and quivering as if in a heraldic wind. She had been a woman held up to nature, precise, deep-bosomed and gay. Looking at the two, he had become confused, as if he were about to receive a reprimand, not the officer's, but his wife's. When she had danced, a little heady with wine, the dance floor had become a tactical maneuver. Her heels had come down staccato and trained, her shoulders as conscious as the tips of those which carry the braid and tassels of promotion. The turn of her head had held the cold vigilance of a sentry whose rounds are not without apprehension. Yet Hedwig had done what she could. If there was ever a massive chic, she had personified it. Yet, somewhere there had been anxiety. The thing that she had stalked, though she herself had not been conscious of it, was Guido's assurance that he was a baron. She had believed it as a soldier believes a command. Something in her sensatory predicament, upon which she herself would have placed no value, had told her much better. Hedwig had become a baroness, without question. In the Vienna of Wolfgang's day, there were few traits that welcomed Jews. Yet somehow he had managed, by various deals in household goods, by discreet buying of old masters and first editions, and by money changing, to secure for Hedwig a house in the inner city, to the north overlooking the Prater, a house that, large, dark, and imposing, became a fantastic museum of their encounter. The long rococo halls, giddy with plush and whorled designs in gold, were peopled with Roman fragments, white and disassociated, a runner's leg, the chilly half-turned head of a matron stricken at the bosom, the blind, bold sockets of the eyes given a pupil by every shifting shadow, so that what they looked upon was an act of the sun. The great salon was of walnut. Over the fireplace hung impressive copies of the Medici shield, and beside them the Austrian bird. 3 massive pianos. Hedwig had played the waltzes of her time with the masterly stroke of a man, in the tempo of her blood, rapid and rising, that quick mannerliness of touch associated with the playing of the Viennese, who, though pricked with the love of rhythm, execute its demands in the dueling matter. 3 massive pianos sprawled over the thick dragon's blood pile of rugs from Madrid. The study harbored 2 rambling desks in rich and bloody wood. Hedwig had liked things in 2s and 3s. Into the middle arch of each desk, silver-headed brads had been hammered to form a lion, a bear, a ram, and a dove, and in their midst a flaming torch. The design was executed under the supervision of Guido, who, thinking on the instant, claimed it as the Volkwing field, though it turned out to be a bit of heraldry long since in decline beneath the papal frown. The full-length windows, a French touch that Guido thought handsome, overlooking the park, were curtained in native velvets and stuffs from Tunis, and the Venetian blinds were of a peculiarly sombre shade of red, so loved by the Austrians. Against the panels of oak that reared themselves above the long table, and up the curving ceiling hung life-size portraits of Guido's claim to father and mother. The lady was a sumptuous Florentine, with bright, sly eyes and overt mouth. Great puffed and pearled sleeves rose to the pricked ear pointings of the stiff lace about the head, conical and braided. The deep accumulation of dress fell about her in groined shadows. The train, rambling through a vista of primitive trees, was carpet thick. She seemed to be expecting a bird. The gentleman was seated precariously on a charger. He seemed not so much to have mounted the animal as to be about to descend upon it. The blue of an Italian sky lay between the saddle and the buff of the tightened rump of the rider. The charger had been caught by the painter in the execution of a falling arc, the mane lifted away in a dying swell, the tail forward, and in between thin, beveiled legs. The gentleman's dress was a baffling mixture of the romantic and the religious, and in the cradling crook of his left arm he carried a plumed hat, crown out. The whole conception might have been a Mardi Gras whim. The gentleman's head, stuck on at the 3/4 angle, had a remarkable resemblance to Guido Volkwing. The same sweeping cabalistic line of nose, the features seasoned and warm save where the virgin blue of the eyeball curved out of the lids, as if another medium that of sight had taken its stand beneath the flesh. There was no interval in the speed of the stare, endless and objective. The likeness was accidental. Had anyone cared to look into the matter, they would have discovered these canvases to be reproductions of 2 intrepid and ancient actors. Guido had found them in some forgotten and dusty corner, and had purchased them, when he had been sure that he would need an alibi for the blood. At this point, exact history stopped for Felix, who, 30 years later, turned up in the world with these facts. The 2 portraits and nothing more. His aunt, combing her long braids with an amber comb, told him what she knew, and this had been her only knowledge of his past. What had formed Felix from the date of his birth to his coming to 30 was unknown to the world, for the step of the wandering Jew is in every son. No matter where and when you meet him, you feel that he has come from some place, no matter from what place he had come, some country that he has devoured rather than resided in, some secret land that he has been nourished on but cannot inherit, for the Jew seems to be everywhere from nowhere. When Felix's name was mentioned, 3 or more persons would swear to have been seen him the week before in 3 different countries simultaneously. Felix called himself Baron Bolkwein, as his father had done before him. How Felix lived, how he came by his money. He knew figures as a dog knows the cove, and as indefatigably he pointed out and ran. How he mastered 7 languages and served that knowledge well, no one knew. Many people were familiar with his figure and face. He was not popular, though the posthumous acclaim meted out to his father, secure from his acquaintances the peculiar semicircular stare of those who, unwilling to greet with earthly equality, nevertheless gave to the living branch, because of death and its sanction, the slight bend of the head, a reminiscent pardon for future apprehension, a bow very common to us when in the presence of this people. Felix was heavier than his father and taller. His hair began too far back on his forehead. His face was a long, stout oval, suffering a laborious melancholy. One feature alone spoke of Hedwig, the mouth, which, though sensuous from lack of desires, hers had been from the Nile, pressed too intimately close to the bony structure of the teeth. The other features were a little heavy, the chin, the nose, and the lids. Into one was set his monocle, which shone a round blind eye in the sun. He was usually seen walking or driving alone, dressed as if expecting to participate in some great event, though there was no function in the world for which he could be said to be properly garbed. Wishing to be correct at any moment, he was tailored in part for the evening and in part for the day. From the mingled passions that made up his past, out of a diversity of bloods, from the crux of 1,000 impossible situations, Felix had become the accumulated and single, the embarrassed. His embarrassment took the form of an obsession for what he termed Old Europe, aristocracy, nobility, royalty. He spoke any given title with a pause before and after the name, knowing circumlocution to be his only contact. He made it interminable and exacting. With the fury of a fanatic, he hunted down his own disqualification, rearticulating the bones of the imperial courts long forgotten. Those long remembered can alone claim to be long forgotten. Listening with an unbecoming loquacity to officials and guardians for fear that his inattention might lose him some fragment of his resuscitation, he felt that the great past might mend a little if he bowed low enough, if he succumbed and gave homage. In 1920 he was in Paris. His blind eye had kept him out of the army. Still spatted, still wearing his cutaway bowing, searching with quick pendulous movements for the correct thing to which to pay tribute, the right street, the right cafe, the right building, the right vista. In restaurants he bowed slightly to anyone who looked, as if he might be someone, making the bend so imperceptible that the surprised person might think that he was merely adjusting his stomach. His rooms were taken because a bourbon had been carried from them to death. He kept a valet and a cook, the one because he looked like Louis XIV, and the other because she resembled Queen Victoria. Victoria in another cheaper material, cut to the poor man's purse. In his search for the particular comédie humaine, Felix had come upon the odd, conversant with ethics and laws, folk story and heresy, taster of rare wines, thumber of rare books and old wives' tales, tales of men who became holy and of beasts that became damned. Read in all plans for fortifications and bridges, given pause by all graveyards on all roads, a pedant of many churches and castles, his mind dimly and reverently reverberated to Madame de Sévigné, Goethe, Loyola, and Brantôme. But Loyola sounded the deepest note. He was alone, apart and single. A race that has fled its generations from city to city has not found the necessary time for the accumulation of the toughness which produces rivalry, nor, after the crucifixion of its ideas, enough forgetfulness in 20 centuries to create legend. It takes a Christian, standing eternally in the Jew's salvation, to blame himself and to bring up from that depth charming and fantastic superstitions through which the slowly and tirelessly milling Jew once more becomes the collector of his own past. His own doing is never profitable until some Goy has put it back into such shape that it can again be offered as a sign. A Jew's undoing is never his own, it is God's. His rehabilitation is never his own, it is a Christian's. The Christian traffic in retribution has made the Jew's history a commodity. It is the medium through which he receives, at the necessary moment, the serum of his own past, that he may offer it again as his blood. In this manner the Jew participates in the two conditions, and in like manner Felix took the breast of his wet nurse, whose milk was his being, but which could never be his birthright. Early in life, Felix had insinuated himself into the pageantry of the circus and the theater. In some way, they linked his emotion to the higher and unattainable pageantry of kings and queens. The more amiable actresses of Prague, Vienna, Hungary, Germany, France, and Italy, the acrobats and sword swallowers, had at one time or another allowed him their dressing rooms, sham salons in which he aped his art. Here he had neither to be capable nor alien. He became for a little while a part of their splendid and reeking falsification. The people of this world, with desires utterly divergent from his own, had also seized on titles for a purpose. There was the Princess Nadia, a Baron von Think, a Principessa Stasera and Stasero, a King Buffo, and a Duchess of Broadback. Gaudy, cheap cuts from the beast life, immensely capable of that great disquiet called entertainment. They took titles merely to dazzle boys about town, to make their public life, and it was all they had, mysterious and perplexing, knowing well that skill is never so amazing as when it seems inappropriate. Felix clung to his title to dazzle his own estrangement. It brought them together. Going amongst these people, the men smelling weaker and the women stronger than their beasts, Felix had the sense of peace that formerly he had experienced only in museums. He moved with a humble hysteria among the decaying brocades and laces of the carnavalet. He loved that old and documentary splendor with something of the love of the lion for its tamer, that sweat-tarnished spangled enigma that, in bringing the beast to heel, had somehow turned towards him a face like his own, but which, through curious and weak, had yet picked the precise fury from his brain. But which, though curious and weak, had yet pick the precise fury from his brain. Nadia had sat back to Felix, as certain of the justice of his eye as she would have been of the linear justice of a Rob's, knowing that Felix tabulated precisely the tense capability of her spine with a slashing curve, swinging into the hard compact cleft of her rump, as angrily and as beautifully as the more obvious tail of her lion. The emotional spiral of the circus, taking its flight from the immense disqualification of the public, rebounding from its illimitable hope, produced in Felix longing and disquiet. The circus was a loved thing that he could never touch, therefore never know. The people of the theater and the ring were for him as dramatic and as monstrous as a consignment on which he could never bid. That he haunted them as persistently as he did was evidence of something in his nature that was turning Christian. He was, in like manner, amazed to find himself drawn to the church, though this tension he could handle with greater ease. Its arena, he found, was circumscribed to the individual heart. It was to the Duchess of Broadback, Frau Mann, that Felix owed his first audience with a gentleman of quality. Frau Mann, then in Berlin, explained that this person had been somewhat mixed up with her in the past. It was with the utmost difficulty that he could imagine her mixed up with anyone. Her coquetries were muscular and localized. Her trade, the trapeze, seemed to have preserved her. It gave her, in a way, a certain charm. Her legs had the specialized tension common to aerial workers. Something of the bar was in her wrist, the tan bark in her walk, as if the air, by its very lightness, by its very non-resistance, were an almost insurmountable problem, making her body, though slight and compact, seem much heavier than that of women who stay upon the ground. In her face was the tense expression of an organism surviving in an alien element. She seemed to have a skin that was the pattern of her costume, a bodice of lozenges, red and yellow, low in the back and ruffled over and under the arms. Faded with the reek of her 3-a-day control, red ties, laced boots. One somehow felt they ran through her as the design runs through hard holiday candies, and the bulge in the groin where she shook the bar. One foot, caught in the flex of the calf, was as solid, specialized, and as polished as oak. The stuff of the thighs was no longer a covering. It was herself. The span of the tightly stitched crotch was so much her own flesh that she was as unsexed as a doll. The needle that had made one of the property of the child made the other the property of no man. "Tonight," Frau Mann said, turning to Felix, "we're going to be amused. Berlin is sometimes very nice at night. Nachvar? And the Count is something that must be seen. The place is very handsome, red and blue. He's fond of blue, God knows why, and he's fond of impossible people. So we are invited." The Baron moved his foot in. "He might even have the statues on." "Statues?" said Felix. "The living statues," she said. "He simply adores them." Felix dropped his hat. It rolled and stopped. "Is he German?" he said. "Oh, no. Italian. But it does not matter. He speaks anything. I think he comes to Germany to change money." He comes, he goes away, and everything goes on the same, except that people have something to talk about. What did you say his name was? I didn't, but he calls himself Count Onatorio Altamonte. I'm sure it's quite ridiculous. He says he is related to every nation. That should please you. We will have dinner. We will have champagne. The way she said dinner and the way she said champagne gave meat and liquid their exact difference, as if by having surmounted two mediums, earth and air, her talent running forward achieved all others. Does one enjoy oneself? He asked. Oh, absolutely. She leaned forward. She began removing the paint with the hurried technical felicity of an artist cleaning a palette. She looked at the Baron derisively. Wir setzen an jetzt still über den Fluss, she said. Standing about a table at the end of the immense room, looking as if they were deciding the fate of a nation, were grouped 10 men, all in parliamentary attitudes, and one young woman. They were listening at the moment of the entrance of Felix and the Duchess of Broadback to a middle-aged medical student with shaggy eyebrows, a terrific widow's peak, over large dark eyes, and a heavy way of standing that was also apologetic. The man was Dr. Matthew O'Connor, an Irishman from the Barbary Coast, Pacific Street, San Francisco, whose interest in gynecology had driven him half around the world. He was taking the part of host, the Count not yet having made his appearance, and was telling of himself, for he considered himself the most amusing predicament. We may all be nature's noblemen, he was saying, and the mention of noblemen made Felix feel happier the instant he caught the word. But, though what followed left him in some doubt. But think of the stories that do not amount to much, that is, that are forgotten in spite of all man remembers, unless he remembers himself, merely because they befell him without distinction of title or office. That's what we call legend, and it's the best a poor man may do with his fate. The other, he waved an arm, we call history. The best the high and mighty can do with theirs. Legend is unexpurgated, but history, because of its actors, is deflowered. Every nation with a sense of humor is a lost nation, and every woman with a sense of humor is a lost woman. The Jews are the only people who have sense enough to keep humor in the family. A Christian scatters it all over the world. Ja, that's it ganz richtig, said the Duchess in a loud voice, but the interruption was quite useless. Once the doctor had his audience, and he got his audience by the simple device of pronouncing at the top of his voice. At such moments as irritable and possessive as a maddened woman's, some of the more bogish and biting of the shorter early Saxon verbs. Nothing could stop him. He merely turned his large eyes upon her, and having done so noticed her and her attire for the first time, which, bringing suddenly to his mind something forgotten but comparable, sent him into a burst of laughter, exclaiming, "Well, but God works in mysterious ways to bring things up in my mind. Now I am thinking of Nika, the nigger who used to fight the bear in the Cirque de Paris. There he was, crouching all over the arena without a stitch on, except a ill-concealed loincloth, all abulge as if with a deep-sea catch, tattooed from head to heel with all the ameublement of depravity, garland with rosebuds and hackwork of the devil. Was he a sight to see? though he couldn't have done a thing. And I know what I am talking about in spite of all that has been said about the black boys. If you had stood him in a gig mill for a week, though, it said, at a stretch it spelled Desdemona. Well then, over his belly was an angel from Chartres. On each buttock, half public, half private, a quotation from the Book of Magic, a confirmation of the Jansenist theory. I'm sorry to say, and here to say it, across his knees. I give you my word, I, on one, on the other, can put those together. Across his chest, beneath a beautiful caravel in full sail, two clasped hands, the wrist bones fretted with point lace. On each bosom an arrow speared heart, each with different initials, but with equal drops of blood. And running into the armpit, all down one side, the word said by Prince Arthur Tudor, son of King Henry VII, when on his bridal night he called for a goblet of water. Or was it water? His chamberlain, wondering at the cause of such drought, remarked on it, and was answered in one word, so wholly epigrammatic, and in no way befitting the great and noble British Empire, that he was brought up with a start. And that is all we will ever know of it. Unless, said the doctor, striking his hand on his hip, you're as good at guessing as Tinny McCaffrey. And the legs? Felix asked uncomfortably. The legs, said Dr. O'Connor, were devoted entirely to vine work, topped by the swart Rambler rose copied from the copying of the Hamburg house of Rothschild. Over his dose, believe it or not, and I shouldn't, a terse account in early monkish script, called by some people indecent, by others Gothic, of the really deplorable condition of Paris before hygiene was introduced, and nature had its way up to the knees. And just above what you mustn't mention, a bird flew, carrying a streamer, on which was incised, Gare tu. I asked him why all this barbarity. He answered he loved beauty, and would have it about him. Are you acquainted with Vienna? Felix inquired. Vienna, said the doctor, the bed into which the common people climb, docile with toil, and out of which the nobility fling themselves, ferocious with dignity. I do, but not so well, but that I remember some of it still. I remember young Austrian boys going to school, flocks of quail they were, sitting out their recess in different spots in the sun, rosy-cheeked, bright-eyed, with damp, rosy mouths, smelling of the herd, childhood, facts of history glimmering in their minds like sunlight, soon to be lost, soon to be forgotten, degraded into proof. Youth is cause, effect is age, so with the thickening of the neck we get data. I was not thinking of its young boys, but of its military superiority, its great names, Felix said, feeling that the evening was already lost, seeing that as yet the host had not made his appearance, and that no one seemed to know it or to care, and that the whole affair was to be given over to this volatile person who called himself a doctor. The army, the Celibate's family, nodded the doctor, his one safety. The young woman, who was in her late 20s, turned from the group, coming closer to Felix and the doctor. She rested her hands behind her against the table. She seemed embarrassed. Are you both really saying what you mean, or are you just talking? Having spoken, her face flushed. She added hurriedly, I am doing advance publicity for the circus. I am Nora Flood. The doctor swung around, looking pleased. Ah, he said. Nora suspects the cold and cautious melody of time crawling, but, he added, I've only just started. Suddenly he struck his thigh with his open hand. Flood, Nora, why, sweet God, my girl, I helped to bring you into this world. Felix, as disquieted as if he were expected to do something, to avert a catastrophe, as one is expected to do something about an overturned tumbler, the contents of which Felix, as disquieted as he were expected to do something to avert a catastrophe, as one is expected to do something about an overturned tumbler, the contents of which is about to drip over the edge of the table and into a lady's lap. On the phrase time crawling, broke into uncontrollable laughter, and though his occurrence troubled him the rest of his life, he was never able to explain it to himself. The company, instead of being silenced, went on as if nothing had happened. 2 or 3 of the younger men were talking about something scandalous, and the Duchess, in her loud, empty voice, was telling a very stout man something about the living statues. This only added to the Baron's torment. He began waving his hand, saying, "Oh, please, please," and suddenly he had a notion that he was doing something that wasn't laughing at all, but something much worse. Though he kept saying to himself, "I am laughing, really laughing, nothing else whatsoever." He kept waving his arms in distress and saying, "Please, please," staring at the floor, deeply embarrassed to find himself doing so. As abruptly he sat straight up, his hands on the arms of the chair, staring fixedly at the doctor, who was leaning forward as he drew a chair up exactly facing him. "Yes," said the doctor, and he was smiling, "you will be disappointed. In questa tomba oscura. Oh, unfaithful one, I am no herbalist. I am no rendezvous. I have no panacea. I am not a mountebank. That is, I cannot or will not stand on my head. I'm no tumbler, neither a friar, nor yet a 13th century Salome dancing ars up on a pair of Toledo blades. Try to get any lovesick girl, male or female, to do that today. If you don't believe such things happened in the long back of yesterday, look at the manuscripts in the British Museum, or go to the cathedral at Clermont-Ferrand. It's all one to me. Become as the rich Mussulmans of Tunis, who hire silly women to reduce the hour of its minimum of sense. Still, it will not be a cure, for there is none that takes place all at once in any man. You know what man really desires? Inquired the doctor, grinning into the immobile face of the Baron. One of 2 things. To find someone who is so stupid that he can lie to her, or to love someone so much that she can lie to him. I was not thinking of women at all, the Baron said, and he tried to stand up. Neither was I, said the doctor. Sit down. He refilled his glass. The fine is very good, he said. Felix answered, No, thank you. I never drink. You will, the doctor said. Let us put it that other way. The Lutheran or Protestant church versus the Catholic. The Catholic is the girl that you love so much that she can lie to you. And the Protestant is the girl that loves you so much that you can lie to her and pretend a lot that you do not feel. Luther, and I hope you don't mind me saying that so, was as body and all ram as ever trampled his own straw, because the custody of the people's remissions of sin and indulgences had been snatched out of his hands, which was in that day in the shape of half of all they had, and which the old monk of Wittenberg had intended to get off with in his own way. So, of course, after that he went wild and chattered like a monkey in a tree and started something he never thought to start. or so the writing on his side of the breakfast table would seem to confirm. An obscene megalomania, and wild and wanton stranger that is. It must come clear and cool and long and not at all, or not at all. What do you listen to in the Protestant Church? To the words of a man who has been chosen for his eloquence. And not too eloquent either, mark you, or he gets the bum's rush from the pulpit, for fear that in the end he will use his golden tongue for political ends. For a golden tongue is never satisfied until it has wagged itself over the destiny of a nation, and this the Church is wise enough to know. But turn to the Catholic Church. Go into Mass at any moment. What do you walk in upon? Something that's already in your blood. You know the story that the priest is telling as he moves from one side of the altar to the other. Be he a cardinal, Leo X, or just some poor bastard from Sicily who has discovered that pecca fortiter among his goats no longer masses his soul, and has, God knows, been God's child from the start. It makes no difference. Why? Because you're sitting there with your own meditations and a legend, which is nipping the fruit of the wren bites, and mingling them both with the holy spoon, which is that story. Or you can get yourself into the confessional, where in sonorous prose, lacking contrition, if you must, you can speak of the condition of the naughty, tangled soul, and be answered in Gothic echoes, mutual and instantaneous. One saying hail to your farewell. Mischief unravels, and the fine high hand of heaven proffers the skein again, calm and forgiven. The one house, he went on, is hard, as hard as the gift of gab, and the other is as soft as a goat's hip. And you can blame no man for anything, and you can't like them all. Wait, said Felix. Yes, said the doctor. Felix, bending forward, deprecatory and annoyed, went on. I like the prince, who was reading a book when the executioner touched him on the shoulder, telling him that it was time, and he, arising, laid a paper cutter between the pages to keep his place, and closed the book. Ah, said the doctor, that is not man living in his moment. It is man living in his miracle. He refilled his glass. Gensenheit, he said. Freut sich hoc von Gott festigen, wie het so immer da. You argue about sorrow and confusion too easily, Nora said. Wait, the doctor answered. A man's sorrow runs uphill. True, it is difficult for him to bear, but it is also difficult for him to keep. I, as a medical man, know in what pocket a man keeps his heart and soul, and in what jostle of the liver, kidneys, and genitalia these pockets are pilfered. There is no pure sorrow. Why? It is bedfellow to lungs, lights, bones, guts, and gall. There are only confusions. About that you are quite right, Nora, my child. Confusions and defeated anxieties. There you have us, one and all. If you're a gymnast, if you're a gymnosophist, if you're a gynosophist, you can do without clothes. And if you're a gimp-legged, you will no more wind between the knees than another. Still it is confusion. God's chosen walk close to the wall. I was in a war once myself, the doctor went on, in a little town where the bumps began tearing the heart out of you, so that you began to think of all the majesty in the world that you would not be able to think of in a minute if the noise came down and struck in the right place. I was scrambling for the cellar, and in it was an old Breton woman and a cow she had dragged with her, and behind that someone from Dublin saying, "Glory be to God," in a whisper, at the far end of the animal. "Thanks be to my Maker," I had her head on, and the poor beast trembling on her 4 legs, so I knew all at once that the tragedy of the beast can be 2 legs more awful than a man's. She was softly dropping her dung at the far end where the thin Celtic voice kept upcoming saying, "Glory be to Jesus." And I'd say to myself, can't the morning come now so I can see what my face is mixed up with? At that flash of lightning, at that a flash of lightning went by, and I saw the cow turning her head straight back, so her horns made 2 wounds against her shoulder. The tears oozed all over her great black eyes. I began talking to her, cursing myself and the Mick, and the old woman looking as if she were looking down her life, sighing it the way a man looks down the barrel of a gun for a name. I put my hand on the poor bitch of a cow, and her hide was running water under my hand, like water tumbling down from Lahore, jerking against my hand as if she wanted to go, standing still in one spot, and I thought, there are directions and speeds that no one has calculated, for believe it or not, that cow had gone somewhere very fast that we didn't know of, and yet was still standing there. The doctor lifted the bottle. "Thank you," said Felix. "I never drink spirits." "You will," said the doctor. "There's one thing that has always troubled me," the doctor continued. "This matter of the guillotine. They say that the headsman has to supply his own knife, as a husband is supposed to supply his own razor. That's enough to rot his heart out before he has whittled one head. Wandering about the wool midge one night, flittering my eyes, I saw with a red carnation in his buttonhole. I asked him what he was wearing it for, just to start up a friendly conversation. He said, "It's the headman's prerogative." And I went as limp as a blotter, snatched from the Senate. At one time, he said, the executioner gripped it between his teeth. At that my bowels turned turtle, seeing him in my mind's eye, stropping the cleaver with a bloom in his mouth, like Carmen. And he, the one man who was supposed to keep his gloves on in church. They often end by slicing themselves up. It's a rhythm that finally meets their own neck. He leaned forward and drew a finger across mine and said, "As much hair as thick as that makes it a little difficult." And at that moment I got heart failure for the rest of my life. I put down a franc and flew like the wind, the hair on my back standing as high as Queen Anne's ruff. And I didn't stop until I found myself sprang in the middle of the Musée de Cluny, clutching the rack. A sudden silence went over the room. The Count was standing in the doorway, rocking on his heels, either hand on the sides of the door. A torrent of Italian, which was merely the culmination of some theme he had begun in the entrance hall, was abruptly halved as he slapped his leg. Standing tall and bent and peering, he moved forward into the room, holding with thumb and forefinger the center of a round magnifying glass which hung from a broad black ribbon. With the other hand he moved from chair to table, from guest to guest. Behind him, in a riding habit, was a young girl. Having reached the sideboard, he swung around with gruesome nimbleness. "Get out," he said softly, laying his hand on the girl's shoulder. "Get out, get out." It was obvious he meant it. He bowed slightly. As they reached the street, the Duchess caught a swirling hem of lace about her chilling ankles. "Well, my poor devil," she said, turning to Felix. "Well," said Felix. "What was that about, and why?" The doctor hailed a cab with the waving end of a bulldog cane. "That can be repaired at any bar," he said. The name of that, said the Duchess, pulling on her gloves, is a brief audience with the great. Brief, but an audience. As they went out the darkened street, Felix felt himself turning scarlet. Is he really a count? He asked. Herr God, said Duchess. Am I what I say? Are you? Is the doctor? She put her hand on his knee. Yes or no? The doctor was lighting a cigarette, and in its flare the Baron saw that he was laughing silently. He put us out for one of those hopes that is about to be defeated. He waved his gloves from the window to other guests who were standing along the club, hailing vehicles. He waved his gloves from the window to other guests who were standing along the curb, hailing vehicles. What do you mean? The Baron said in a whisper. Count Onotario Altamont might be the name eventually roll. God damn it. Count Onotario Altamont might the name eventually roll over the Ponte Vecchio and into the Arno. Suspected that he had come upon his last erection. The doctor began to sing Nur Ink Nach. Frau Mann, with her face pressed against the cab window, said, It's snowing. At her words, Felix turned his color up. Where are we going? He asked Frau Mann. She was quite gay again. Let us go to Heinrich's. I always do when it's snowing. He mixes the drinks stronger then, and he's a good customer. He always takes in the show. Very well, said the doctor, preparing to rap on the window. Where's this Heinrich? Go down Unter den Linden, Frau Mann said. I'll tell you when. Felix said, If you don't mind, I'll get down here. He got down, walking against the snow. Seated in the warmth of the favorite cafe, the doctor, unwinding his scarf, said, There's something missing and whole about the Baron Felix. Damp from the waist up, which reminds me of Mademoiselle Basquiat, who was damp from the waist down. A girl without legs, built like a medieval of use. She used to wheel herself to the Pyrenees on a board. What there was of her was beautiful in a cheap traditional sort of way. The face that one sees on people who come to a racial, not a personal amazement. I wanted to give her a present for what of her was missing. And she said, Pearls. They go so well with everything. Imagine. And the other half of her still in God's bag of tricks. Don't tell me that what was missing had not taught her the value of what was present. Well, in my case, the doctor went on, rolling down his gloves, a sailor saw her one day and fell in love with her. She was going uphill and the sun was shining all over her back. It made a saddle across her bent neck and flickered along the curls of her head, gorgeous and bereft as the figurehead of a Norse vessel that the ship had abandoned. So he snatched her up, board and all, and took her away, and had his will. When he got good and tired of her, just for gallantry, he put her down on her board about 5 miles out of town, so she had to roll herself back again, weeping something fearful to see, because one is accustomed to see tears falling down to the feet. Ah, truly, a pin board might come up to the chin of a woman, and still she will find reason to weep. I tell you, madame, if one gave birth to a heart on a plate, it would say love, and twitch, like the leg of a frog. Wunderbar, exclaimed Frau Mann. Wunderbar, my God. I'm not through, said the doctor, laying his gloves across his knees. Some day I'm going to see the Baron again, and when I do I shall tell him about the mad Wittelsbach, who he'll look as distressed as an owl tied up in a muffler. Ah, exclaimed Frau Mann, he will enjoy it. He's so fond of titles. Listen, the doctor said, ordering around. I don't want to talk of the Wittelsbach. Oh, God, when I think back to my past, everyone in my family, a beauty, my mother, with hair on her head as red as a fire kicked over in spring, and that was early in the 80s, when a girl was the toast of the town, and going the limit meant lobster à la Newburgh. She had a hat on her as big as the top of a table, and everything on it but running water, her bosom clinched into a corset of buckram, and my father sitting up beside her, snap while they were riding on a roller coaster. He had on one of those silly little yellow jackets and a tan bowler just up. He had on one of those silly little yellow jackets and a tan bowler just up over his ears. And he must have been crazy, for he was sort of cross-eyed. Maybe it was the wind in his face, or thoughts of my mother where he couldn't do anything about it. Frau Mann took up her glass, looking at it with one eye closed. "I have an album of my own," she said in a warm voice, "and everyone in it looks like a soldier, even though they're dead." The doctor grinned, biting his teeth. Frau Mann tried to light a cigarette. The match wavered from side to side of her unsteady hand. Frau Mann was slightly tipsy, and the incessant hum of the doctor's words was making her sleepy. Seeing that Frau Mann dozed, the doctor got up lightly and tiptoed noiselessly. Seeing that Frau Mann dozed, the doctor got up lightly and tiptoed noiselessly to the entrance. He said to the waiter in bad German, "The lady will pay," opened the door, and went quietly into the night. God.